In this video I'm going to give you a quick introduction to the Nokia Lumia 1320. Now this is Nokia's mid-tier phablet or large screen smartphone. As you'd expect, it's really all about the big screen on this device. It's 6 inches. We're going to talk quite a bit about that later, but there are some other things I want to talk about. But before we get into those, let's just take a look at the rest of the box contents. You've got here the normal Nokia leaflet, and then in the bottom there is the charger, USB cable and headset. So very standard box contents here, what you'd expect from a kind of mid-tier device. But let's go back to the device itself here. Notice here that we've got the glance screen here. That's Nokia's kind of always on screen. And yes, it is really all about this big 6-inch screen. We've got the yellow variant of the device here. It does come in a number of other colours. Let's talk about some of the other hardware elements though. Let's just turn the device over here. You can see the usual Nokia branding. There's a mono loudspeaker down there. Actually pretty decent performance from that. There's a 5 megapixel camera with an LED flash. Now that doesn't measure up to the pure view cameras you get in the higher end devices, but it's still perfectly adequate. And with some of the onboard Nokia software, things like Cinemagraph and Refocus, you actually get quite a lot of value out of it. You know, it's a fun camera to use. We'll just take the back cover off here. It's one of the nice elements about the design of the 1320. It's how Nokia do a lot of their kind of mid-tier or their cheaper devices. It actually works very well because of course you can customize it to your own color should you so choose. You can see here we've got an integral battery that actually takes up most of the internal space on the phone. Most of the clever bits of the phone, the processor, etc. are up here. There's also some aerials of course in various places, bottom and top. But this battery, 3,400 milliamp hour capacity, so that's pretty good in terms of battery performance. You need it on a 6-inch screen device, but it should have no problem doing a day. Our experience would actually suggest you get a day and a half of typical usage out of it. But I think the most important element to show you here is the SIM card slot and the micro SD card slot. It's actually really important on a device like this, which is kind of built for video consumption, I feel, with a big screen, to have that micro SD card slot. You can expand the internal memory, which is 8 gigabytes, up to 64 gigabytes using a micro SD memory card. So that's really great for video content. Actually, in the current version of Windows Phone, it really is just about content, but in the forthcoming Windows Phone 8.1 update, we understand you'll be able to use it for app installs as well. So it'll make this device even more flexible. So having a micro SD card slot really is becoming a must-have in my opinion. Okay, so going back to the front of the device here, we've got a front-facing VGA camera. That's actually pretty low resolution. It's good enough for, you know, the odd video call, but it is one of the cuts where Nokia have done to kind of get that price down. In terms of pricing, we're actually talking about £300 as a high street price, SIM-free, of course. On contract, you'll get it for probably starting from £25–35 a month, and it will vary depending on which market you're in. But of course the 1320, it is a phablet device, so really a lot of the focus has to go on the screen. And what's interesting here, compared to some of Nokia's other devices that have had large screens, the 625, I think more money's been put into this screen. It's 6 inch, it's IPS LCD, and you can see actually the quality of it here is pretty good. It also has a lot of the typical Nokia tricks, so there's a super sensitive touch, so you can use the back of your fingernail or a pen or other non kind of capacitive objects. So that's a really nice touch. But I think more important, it's protected by Gorilla Glass 3, so that means it's going to be really resistant to scratches and things like that. Unusual really in this kind of mid-tier segment to see one of the more recent versions of Gorilla Glass. There's also something called True Color, that really brings out the colour. More importantly, there's a clear black display, that means you get less reflections. Not as good as the implementation on devices like the 1520 or some of the higher end ones, but still pretty good. In fact, if I bring in the 1520 here, you can see there is a difference in screen quality. That's partly about the 1520 having the higher resolution 1080p here as opposed to 720p on the 1320, but actually still a surprisingly good quality screen. I, was expecting it to be a bit more of a step down between these two devices, which are really sister devices. You can see here very similar in size, both 6-inch screen devices. But obviously this costs about £550 or £500. This is at least £200 cheaper, and I think that price will fall more in time as well. Another interesting comparison to make in terms of screen is with the 625. It was kind of Nokia's original big screen kind of mid-tier device, and actually you can see how big the 1320 here is if we compare it to the 625. Neither of these have small screens as such. I mean, the 625 is more standard, but I think more importantly you can see the quality of the screen on the 1320 significantly better. It is about resolution. I mean, this is only 480 by 800 and this is 720p, but you can also see it in the viewing angle. They're much better on the 1320, and this is a lot to do with the way the screen is made up, but the 1320 here does have Nokia's clear black display technology. Not so true on the 625 here, so outside visibility much better on the 1320. And for two devices which are about kind of having larger screens, I think the 1320 has been much better done. In terms of the internals, actually these devices aren't that dissimilar, but the 1320 again has the edge here. And it's 1 GB of RAM, and it's a Snapdragon 400 processor, so just a bit more up to date here than the 625 in terms of actual specs. 1.7 GHz dual core, pretty irrelevant as far as Windows Phone is concerned, but this is kind of the new low-end Windows Phone spec in one sense. There's actually going to be 3 tiers, and this will be the middle one, and the 1520 here is kind of the high end, the Snapdragon 800, Snapdragon 400, and then in the future we'll see some Snapdragon 200 devices. But the 1320, it's kind of meant to be the equivalent of the 620 in terms of a low-end device. And just to show you the size difference there as well between those devices, really apparent here. Obviously much smaller screen, 3.8 inches versus 6 inches here. But in terms of the actual processing, the difference in performance, you won't see all that much when you're using these devices. They both run pretty smoothly, but the 1320 is just a bit more future-proof in terms of what it'll be able to cope with. I would say it's probably broadly equivalent to the 920. You have to be careful when talking about process and things like that on mobile devices, but the 1320 has actually got quite a bit of oomph to it. You'll notice that when you're doing things like Cinematograph. Of course it won't measure up to the quad-core devices, but it's still pretty good. The other big thing about the 1320 in terms of the specification is that it's got the 4G LTE connectivity, so that makes it a very good choice as kind of a future-proof device. Makes it more attractive to Western markets as well, and so that means you'll get good download speeds on cellular. Of course you do actually have to have it supported by your contract. We're on Wi-Fi here, and I'm just going to show you off a YouTube video just to give you an example of this big screen. The advantage for watching video really is quite apparent. The other time,
we're going to do an unboxing of the new
there we go. We'll just shut that off and go back, and just to show you another example of where you get the advantage of the bigger screen here in the browser. You can see makes it easier to read text on a web page. You just get the text is bigger. Also in things like Office you'll see more information, and so that 6-inch screen has real advantages. Windows Phone isn't optimized for the 6-inch screens quite as much as I'd like, and there's definitely room for improvement there. But even so, for most people a bigger screen is about having stuff bigger on the screen, and you certainly get that with the 1320. So there's a quick run through the 1320. We showed you against some of the other devices, the 1520, its sister device, the 625, which is actually selling really well, but perhaps isn't quite so well defined in component terms at 1320. I think the 1320 is kind of better put together. There's been some more sensible choices on screen technology. Now, I have to say the 1320 is a bit more expensive than the 625 was, and that does make a difference. But even so, I do expect the 1320 to drop in price quite rapidly, and once it gets to the £250 price point or even below, it's going to make a very good buy indeed, kind of as the next generation good value Windows Phone device. It is big, and that's the decision you're going to have to make. Compare it to the 620 here and you can really see the size difference. I've got quite small hands and I find it quite difficult to use the 6-inch screen devices. In preference I'd go for something 5 inches or below, but that's really a personal thing. And actually as a mid-tier phablet, I think the 1320 is really well specified. It's really nicely put together. Yes, it's using this kind of cheaper construction method of putting a shell round a solid block, but really that doesn't matter. It actually is a good thing. I mean, it makes it good in terms of standing up for day-to-day usage. And overall the 1320 has actually impressed me far more than I thought it would. Of course there are cuts, the camera being one of the obvious ones. You've got the 5 megapixel camera there. Of course it's nothing like the 20 megapixel camera on the 1520, but there is a £250 price difference between these two devices. There are some other important cuts. I think one of the ones that people won't know about is the microphone. You've got 4 high quality microphones in this, and you just got 1 in the 1320. It doesn't actually make that big a difference in terms of recording quality, at least in my experiments, but it is something to be aware of. And of course, the feel in the hand, it's all those indefinable factors that you can feel the 1520 is a higher quality device, but the 1520 gets a lot closer than some of Nokia's other mid-tier devices. So I say that's partly about the price point, but as I say, I'm trying to sort of say where's the price cuts have been, and actually they're not as apparent as they are in other devices. And of course there are things like the resolution of the screen, but overall very impressive indeed. And so if you're looking for that kind of good value but large screen device, the 1320 is going to be a very serious contender, regardless of whether you like Windows Phone or not. And I think particularly that will be true with the Windows Phone 8.1 update on the way, which of course the 1320 will be getting with all the other Windows Phone devices.